Welcome to the Hudson Institute's Dialogues on American Foreign Policy and World Affairs. My name is Walter Russell Mead. I'm a distinguished fellow here at Hudson and a professor at Bard College and the Global View columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Today, I have the very great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Edward Luttwak. Dr. Luttwak is a strategic advisor to the United States and certain treaty allies. He has served on U.S. presidential transition teams, testified before committees of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate, and has variously advised the U.S. Armed Forces, the Department of Defense, the U.S. State Department, White House Chief of Staff, and foreign governments, including Japan. He's the author of numerous books and countless other pieces. His first book, Coup d'etat, a practical handbook, was published in 1968 and has since been published in 23 languages. The book was derived from his experiences as a London-based oil consultant. His most recent book, The Rise of China versus the Logic of Strategy, is based on research he conducted for the US government. He's recently written a series of Japanese language short books on Japanese issues. Thanks for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And yesterday, Armenia's prime minister signed the Russian-backed settlement to resolve the conflict in NagornoKarabakh. What does this mean for the Caucasus, and how likely is it that this one will be a lasting peace, unlike the last few ceasefires we've seen?
Well, as you recall, when the Soviet Union broke up, a lot of the borders between the republics that became independent were very complicated borders with enclaves of all sides and so on. Nevertheless, all of these republics accepted the borders as they were, in the knowledge that if they tried to revise, even on common sense grounds, like Kyrgyzstan having Uzbek enclaves and so on, then all hell would break loose and it would never end. The exception was Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Armenians were off to a start right at the beginning. The Azerbaijan was less organized. So in a series of combats and activities, by 1994, the Armenians had succeeded in expanding the borders they inherited from the old Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, which was a smaller territory plus an enclave called Karabakh. The word Nagorno they use is a Russian term, which means more or less the same thing. So the Armenians were victorious. By 1994, they take the enclave, and then they take all the Azeri territory between the Armenian border and the enclave. So they basically doubled the territory or near enough. The Azeris took a long time to get organized. They went through a period of high oil income. They developed important relationships with Israel and with Turkey. And they started acquiring modern weapons and some modern military knowledge, such as the fact that all the inherited weapons like battle tanks and all that could be outmaneuvered vertically, so to speak, by things like drones and so on. So they basically built a modern military force, much more modern than the Armenian, which is strong in artillery and tanks, but not. Result, they finally launched an attack because there were many border incidents. There was always an excuse because there were always the incidents, bloody attacks. They picked one of them, they started moving, and they have been able to advance successfully and victoriously. And finally, the Russians, who were watching all this, finally provided the ceasefire thing, the opportunity. The Armenian had to accept it because otherwise they're going to lose more territory. And so now there's a possibility of reaching an agreement. The problem is the restoring the status quo of the original Soviet borders, which is the only real, basis to there's nothing, they could not agree on anything else than that. Doing that would require additional, movements and changes and so on. And then it would require the Azeris to accept that there is an Armenian autonomous region and that should be autonomous. At this moment, the Armenians demand not autonomy within Azerbaijan, but independence. And the Azeris say, well, in that case, we will give you nothing, in effect. So I believe that the Russians will be able to secure this. This is a part of the world in which the Russian influence is not malevolent. It's not causing worse troubles. It is, the Russians are being responsible, reasonably even-handed, and they're affecting the ceasefire.
It looks to be following a bit of a pattern where Russia and Turkey, while they're not aligned necessarily, don't like each other very much, seem to be very successful at kind of splitting gains.
Yes, because the Turks always defer to the Russians.
Yeah.
The Turks, Erdogan is a guy who speaks very loudly. He has this neo-Ottoman dream, which owes a lot to soap opera neo-Ottomanism, very little to the Ottomans. But when it comes to the crunch, he defers to the Russians. He knows that, he has a cardboard military force. The Russians have a real military force. So that is why the partnership works.
Yeah. So Erdogan wins in the sense that the Turkish nationalists and the Islamists will both be applauding in Turkey.
That's correct.
Azerbaijan gains territory and stature, but Russia ends up actually controlling a lot of the key. Russia's presence in the South Caucasus is stronger today than it was a month ago. Is that?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, look, they didn't play one side against the other. They acted responsibly, and this is their zone of influence, and they're using it positively. As for the Azeris, they are not in any sense Islamist. As you know, it's the only Shia republic in the world other than Iran, and you also know that they are actually truly secular.
Yeah. Now, this does not seem like a good result for Iran, in that it actually brings an increased Azeri presence on the border and limits Iran's, it's a defeat for Iran's ally Armenia too.
Right. As you well know, Iran is the last of the multinational countries. All the others have broken up. Between the Kurds and the Baluch in the east and the Khuzestani Arabs and various other Turkic populations, and then Luris and so on, the Azeris, a block of 20 million that occupy the whole of Western Iran, other than the Kurdish areas, the Azeris rebelled against the fact that the Tehran government was supporting Armenia against Azerbaijan. There is Shia Iran supporting Christian Armenia against Shia Azerbaijan. The reason is that Azerbaijan is a danger to Iran, precisely because all multinational countries break up. And here is the 20 million Azeris having a smaller number in Azerbaijan, but doing very well, very successfully. When you are in Baku, you see people crossing the border to go to Baku to enjoy its restaurants and hotels, and for the girls to be able to walk around without rags on their heads and so on. So the border was open and had a very deleterious influence on the Iranian influence and control, the central government's control over Algeria. So yes, it is not a good result for them.
And also, when one looks at the success that the Israelis have had over the years in good and remarkably good intelligence penetration into Iran, it does seem that the Azeris must in some way be at least one of the factors contributing to that success.
Well, I don't think they speak about intelligence transiting and cooperation all that much, but the fact is that there is a strategic alliance between Israel and Azerbaijan, and it's not some kind of pragmatic deal between dictators or something like that. because the Azeris happened to have been identified seriously friends of the Jews for about 3 centuries. And 2 centuries ago, there was in fact a migration of Jews from Dagestan, nearby mountainous area, into Azerbaijan by invitation. So they actually have their own, there's a Jewish town in Azerbaijan. So Shia Muslim, or as they are, nevertheless, friends of the Jews, specifically for centuries. So the Israeli agreement with them and the fact that the Israelis have sold them willingly very high-tech stuff that they wouldn't sell just to people just for the sake of the cash reflects this. And the Azeris have benefited in the war because obviously they're not on getting equipment, they're also getting methods to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So does this suggest that Russia, I mean, Iran can't be grateful to Russia at this moment for its Caucasus policy?
No, they would have wanted, look, the Russians played, I hope that at least in this part of the world, what they're doing in Ukraine is nefarious every single day. In this part of the world, constructive also because, as you know, Turkey strongly supported Azerbaijan, very strongly, and in theory could have helped Azerbaijan very directly by simply attacking Iran, because Turkey and Iran, and Turkey and Armenia, I said Iran, I'm sorry. Turkey and Armenia share a border.
Right.
Turks, instead of traveling to Baku to help the Azeris, could have simply attacked Armenia. Well, the Russians made it clear to them that no matter what else was happening, they wouldn't tolerate any attack on Armenia at all, and that it would come down like a ton of bricks. So the easiest way for Turkey to support Azerbaijan, namely to put military pressure on Armenia, was prohibited.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that many other countries around the world would immediately have stepped up, given the atrocities, the unrequited, unacknowledged atrocities of the past.
So it's all very, very interesting how this happened. It's also that neither the United States nor the European Union had any role in the agreement that was reached. And that must be kind of a source of joy to Putin.
Well, it was a choice. It was an American choice because, there is a so-called Minsk process. There was a mechanism for the Europeans to be involved. There was a mechanism for the Americans to get involved. But there was no inclination to get involved on either of them. The Europeans, I mean, as you know, Macron intervened seriously to stop one of Erdogan's naval adventures in the Mediterranean. But the fact is, this is Russia's neighborhood. The concept of zones of influence is supposed to be a 19th century whatnot, etc., but they do exist. They're not supposed to, but they exist.
Yes.
The Russian zone of influence. So we can all be thankful that so far it has been used responsibly. Proper way.
All right. So you think this is a possible stable result that we're seeing now?
Yes, if the Azeris add, in order to succeed in war, you have to win the battle. And in order to succeed for real, you have to win not the battle, but the war. And to win the war, you need a peace plan. The only purpose of war is to bring peace.
Right.
The peace brought by diplomats always fails. Wars brings real peace. They've had the real war. There was a winner and a loser. What the loser lost was only what he took in 1994. So it's a restoration of what was a globally recognized border.
Yeah.
So therefore, this thing can stick because you win a war and the territories you win, the whole world says belong to you, you should keep them. But now the Azeris must come up with a peace plan. They have to present they have to talk reconciliation and peace and all that kind of stuff. The winner has to be the peacemaker.
And they have to define some kind of autonomy for Karabakh, don't they?
Absolutely. The status quo ante where the Azeris get all their territory back, also means that the Karabakh area has to have its autonomy. This is an Armenian area, and the Armenians in Karabakh have to have real autonomy, which is what was written and in the original, that was the original setup. And if you're going to restore it, you have to restore it in full. You can't deviate one way or the other. Otherwise, there'll be war again.
Yep. So it sounds like maybe 2/3 of the Armenians have fled Karabakh, is what I'm.
Yes, but that is temporary, and they would immediately go back as soon as it's reestablished. They don't have homes in what you might call mainland Armenia. Their homes are there. Karabakh is not an unfortunate part of the world. I visited the area in Soviet times, and it was a very pleasant. It's almost hills and vineyards and things. Not a bad part of the world.
So sort of like Georgia in some ways.
Yes, it's like Georgia. Yes, I mean, it's a recognizable variant of the Mediterranean landscape.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is helpful. Now, what about Turkey? Here's Turkey seems to be involved in Libya, in Azerbaijan. That's a range. I hear from some French diplomats that Turkey's been involved in West Africa, has signed agreements with Niger and other places. How seriously should Turkey be taken as a factor in world politics now, or regional?
Well, it depends, because Erdogan's poses, this neo-Ottoman pose implies that empire implies conquest, implies success in war. But actually, Turkish military capabilities are much less than what meets the eye. Those big modern ships that they sent to the Eastern Mediterranean were much bigger, newer and bigger than the Greek ships. But it's a cardboard navy. It's a cardboard navy.
I'm told the French could sink them in 15. I'm told the French could sink them in 15 minutes if they wanted to.
Right. They sank the French. The British still have sovereign bases in Cyprus.
Yeah.
There's sovereign territories on which there are naval and some. And the French sent 2 Rafale aircraft to Cyprus. And some Turkish, not a military person, a non-military person, commented that this was a joke and the Turkish Air Force has many more aircraft or something. Actually, one of their 2 Rafales were quite enough to sink the navy that Erdogan sent. So Turkey can make a noise so long as it's not actual combat. If there is any actual combat against anybody resembling a European type force, no chance. But Erdogan's game is that he has been losing popularity at home for many reasons, and lately because of an economy which is in very bad shape, partly because of his mismanagement of his son-in-law or some such person. So he therefore offers his people circuses, adventures.
Mm-hmm.
The people who accept the entertainment that Erdogan offers, the imperial posturing, the neo-Ottoman posturing, which, as you noted, extends as far as Africa. There are activities in Somalia and so on. But the Libyan adventure, the claim to half the Mediterranean on the basis of an agreement between Turkey and Libya, whereby they divided the Mediterranean between them. So I commented that they should have made the agreement with Morocco, because then the Turkey
have even more.
Yes. Extended all across and engulfed Sicily and southern Italy and so on. So all of this entertainment activity is not preventing the erosion of his power, because actually Turkey is a country where there are universities. Some of these universities are not very bad universities. Some are quite good, and more educated people. And as you know, Erdogan lost the elections in the capital city, Ankara, where there are universities and educated people. Then he lost it in Istanbul, which is a megalopolis, 20 million, which was his political base. Why? Because educated Turks are rejecting the neo-Ottoman posturing, these adventures, the provocations, and all the conflictuality it brings with Europe and so on. So he's losing ground. And so he therefore offers more circuses because he can't offer, for example, economic advancement. It's not part of his system. His party was full of talented economics, people who really knew how to manage the economy, but they're all followers either of Fethullah Gulen, whom he, of course, broke up with over the Mevi Marmara episode, because Fethullah Gulen really was a peaceful, he's a real Islamist and a really peaceful one. There are very few of them. And so he lost all the Gulenists who were educated. Most of the honest civil servants in Turkey were Gulenists, and he lost them. And then he lost the educated of his own party, like the foreign minister Davutoglu, who is a Crimean Tatar university professor and all that. And Gül, the president, Gül, who was a distinguished economist, he lost the educated people in his own party. Then he lost all the Gulenists that were persecuted and are being persecuted in prison. And so he got left with his original AKP group, who are football hooligans, basically. Comes out of a football thing in Istanbul. It was and he himself is uneducated. And so I don't think this Erdogan thing is going to last very long, because every time there's an election, he loses ground.
So where does Turkey go?
Well, Turkey can go to Turkey can have its own path through its own modernity, through these very educated, advanced, and civilized people who rejected the neo-Ottomanism. For example, when he converted the Hagia Sophia Mosque to the Hagia Sophia Cathedral Church into a mosque, in Istanbul there was very little applause, because from the point of view of the Istanbulis, this was a primitive backward step. Tourism is important in Istanbul.
Exactly.
Hagia Sophia was the greatest tourist attraction in all of Turkey. And now, by simply turning it to a place where 5 times a day there are upturned bottoms confronting the visitor, that's enough. And the Istanbulis didn't want that. They didn't want this present from Erdogan.
Yeah.
That's the way forward for Turkey, simply to embrace its modernity, which is very considerable, and to turn its back on, this obsolete past of it.
The Gulf Arabs seem terrified of Turkey.
Well, they're
of Erdogan, let me say.
Right, because it's a matter of relative capability. Somebody attacked the gas separation facility in Abaqaiq, an immense installation, burned half of it. Saudis have spent 2 billion or 3 billion, or maybe more, 10 billion, on their Air Force. Yet when their Abaqaiq facility was bombed by Iran, either through its own, or directly or indirectly, there was an Iranian thing that did it, the Saudi government did not have the courage to pick up the phone and tell the Air Force to take out target package 4, something. They didn't do it. So when people have no military capability, a country like Turkey that has some military capability becomes an absolute threat. They feel totally powerless. Plus, of course, Erdogan has been hosting the Islamic Brotherhood, sworn enemy of Egypt, which is the backup country for all the Arabs, and sworn enemy of everybody these days, except for the Qataris, who are friends with everybody, absolutely everybody, including the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah. So that I found interesting, that outside of the region, Turkey is taken less seriously, but inside seen as a major
relative capability. Yes.
Yeah.
In the country of the blind, etc.
Do the Turks and the Israelis ever get back together if the Turks go embrace their modernity, or is that phase of history kind of over?
No, I think if they do, remember that modern Turkey never broke with Israel.
Yep.
Turkish Airlines, until the COVID stopped everything, Tel Aviv was the #1 destination for Turkish Airlines. I think 10 flights a day for Turkish Airlines, and they're competing Turkish Airlines another 4 flights or 5 flights a day. So you're supposed to be terribly remote and distant, hostile, whatever, of a country, and you run 15 flights a day to it.
Mm.
They run to any Arab country by far. So there were lots of connections, lots of links, and only at the political level, the governments quarreled. The quarrel, but the Turks were very careful never to take on the Israelis militarily. I mean, when they threatened with their ships, that they proclaimed, if you recall, they recently proclaimed that the part of the Mediterranean they claim is theirs is wrapped around Cyprus.
Right.
The attribute to northern Cyprus, southern waters of some, by some, some map they invented, would have cut across the Israeli zone of the sea, but no, and they realized that cardboard can't go against steel. So they've been careful. They've acted in Libya when there is no real opposition. They acted in Syria in the north, with these Turkmen, actually very different people. They're like the Azeris, really, but because they can pretend that they're Turks and stuff. So they've been careful. There's been reckless talk from Erdogan, but he's been careful not to actually collide, have his cardboard collide with steel.
In some ways, as I look at Turkey, I think about your book on Byzantine grand strategy. The Byzantines never really thought they could resolve things on any one front, but they needed to sort of manage on many different. Is that
totally correct? One enemy attacks you, it's terrible. If 3 enemy attacks you, that is got the solution right there. All you have to do is to persuade them one way or the other to attack each other. They're kind of people who attack. So, it's a slight turn of angle and so on. The Turkish foreign ministry has been impacted by the Erdogan degradation of all Turkish institutions, but not as much as the armed forces, where a lot of the were kicked out, thrown out, or whatever. And the Turkish diplomatic corps is very respectable, has a lot of expertise, and it's one of the resources that is waiting to emerge once Erdogan allows them to. They're good diplomats, and they understand these things.
Well, let's take a journey of a few thousand miles and think about China for a while. Talk about China for a while. We have now, certainly during the campaign, President Trump was saying that Joe Biden is going to be soft on China. We've seen dramatic shift in U.S. opinion about China and in a polarization between the U.S. and China under Trump. Where do you think things are headed now under a new administration?
Well, Walter, I feel the need to preface my remarks by saying that there are sinologists. Sinologists are people who invested a lot of time and real effort to learn Chinese and to be able to read these Chinese characters, which convey concepts and ideas, as you know, not words. I myself have only ever been a tourist in China. I was there in 1976. Actually, I was there when Mao died. I was invited to the Great Hall of the People and actually looked down and saw his dead body. I traveled to places like, I was in Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet, years before they were open to tourism. And I've been traveling ever since. And I have many friends in China. But because of complete shameful laziness, all I have is some colloquial Chinese. I can understand Chinese television, CCTV, the news, because they're talking about things that you can more or less guess what they are. They show pictures. But so therefore, speaking about China, I have this limit. So let me say 2 things. First of all, once countries get into collision, the image of the other country in your country gets flattened. So here are these Chinese, and they're all the same, and they're all doing exactly what Xi Jinping tells them. And what are they doing is they are threatening countries, like they threatened Australia yesterday, saying you better watch out because otherwise, so they have expanded. They've actually stolen coral reefs and shoals and tiny rocks through a zone of 3 million square kilometers in the South China Sea, and promising that they wouldn't do anything there. Then they said they were going to build air-sea rescue stations. That is a turbulent sea. That promise, by the way, was believed by the Obama administration until 2015, when Xi Jinping actually was arriving in Washington, that they would not militarize it. Then, as you know, they have attempted to steal the islands of the southernmost islands of Japan, Senkaku.
Mm-hmm.
They have relentlessly, during the long period when the Indians believed that they had the best of relations with the Chinese, during a long period, they advanced from Tibet, from the Tibet that they had conquered in 1959, to take more and more of the intervening territories. In the Ladakh area, which is this Tibetan area of northwest India, through et cetera, territorial expansionism, relentless territorial expansionism, unless stopped. That is to say, not the approach of a, Genghis Khan, the conqueror, but rather the hotel burglar who goes in the corridor, tries every door. If a door is open, he comes in. The door is not, he doesn't. So all of this has been going on. And as you know, as it was going on, we kept wondering, who is doing this? Because concurrently, there were naval incidents where US ships and Chinese ships would meet, and the Chinese ships would try to cut across the US ship, almost cause accidents, when the US captain would call the task force commander, Chinese side, and say, what the hell are you doing? The answer is, I didn't authorize it. In other words, there are all these phenomena, venturism, pressure. One of Xi Jinping's thing has been that he has cut down the Chinese army by 2/3. It's now, less than 1 million, really. It was 3 million, and to get more money for Air Force and Navy. And so when they suddenly cross the border into Ladakh, we may suspect that it's, and we don't know, okay? So bottom line, when I wrote a book 10 years ago saying that the Chinese would relentlessly grab and advance and threaten, bringing into existence a coalition against them. The first country, and when I wrote that, the Harvard Press, which as you know, is peer-reviewed, turned to sinologists and said, there's a fellow, Luttwak, who is not a sinologist, depicts a China that is behaving mindlessly, which is to say, it's like a remote control car, poorly guided, hits the walls. And I said, no, it's like one of those very cheap stamped metal cars that you wind up and only go straight, bangs against the wall and keeps trying to bang against the wall. So when I said that, a very serious person who works in the Pentagon, I was writing a contract for research for the Pentagon. Another such person, who unlike me is a real sinologist, protested and wanted the report to be suppressed. Okay? He's a gentleman, so he didn't do it behind my back, suppressed on the grounds that it was a delusion that these countries would respond to China unless the United States did so first. Well, the United States did not. At the height of the expansionism, when it really came out, 2009, in response to the financial crisis, which they misread, Obama administration was focused on, on dealing with the terrible crisis at home, and needed the Chinese to help out by boosting demand and other things. So they basically didn't respond. That was when the Australians came out with a white paper saying, if we don't contain China, even New Zealand will be taken by them. The At that point, the Japanese, as you recall, had the neutralist phase, neutralist government, didn't want to get involved. Well, the Australian Prime Minister Gifford, a woman, formidable lady, went there 2011, just after the tsunami, went up to Fukushima to show she's not afraid of radiation, descended in Washington, told them, better bear up. And of course, Abe arrives the next year, first Australia, then Japan, going to containment mode. Meantime, in India, you still have the Singh government that says that all this Himalayan stuff is just a waste of time. There's nothing there. You can't grow any potatoes there or rice, let alone, etc. Then by 2014, the Indians come in. So we now have Australians, Japanese, and Indians by 2014. The Vietnamese have been there for about 2,000 years. So they're also part of this coalition. And then in 2015, Obama discovers that he has been misled by his advisors, that there is no conciliation, that Xi Jinping is arriving in the White House, not offering to settle matters, but not at all, to insist that this is our right, it's our territory, and so on. So that is when Obama authorizes the first freedom of navigation operation of that phase, which was very frustrating until then to, Commander-in-Chief Pacific, who tried to have them solved. Yeah. So this coalition was brought into existence by Chinese behavior. So they act in a certain way. They drive a friendly country into neutrality. Then they drive them from neutrality into opposition, and they keep punching the same way. So that's why I wrote this book without any ifs and buts, no on the other hands, predicting it in a deterministic way because I affirm my view of it. Now, I have to specify that the country that I described as a cheap wind-up toy is a country where during those 10 years, the study of Western philosophy has increased in more and more universities. Xi Jinping himself has launched the huge translation program of Goethe in 85 volumes.
Good Lord.
Every Chinese Germanist is at work on it because he knows Faust by heart. He is a Faustian character. Remember, he upholds the Communist Party that caused the death of his mother, who committed suicide or something just after having to go with his father, who was a top party man, demoted, side by side in the street while she was shouting to him, counter-revolutionary, dog, pig, capitalist, whatever, while the mob was pummeling them both. His sister died, his sister committed suicide, a half-sister, and the other sister almost died of hunger, except the daughter of some Mongolian party chief would throw her food through the window onto the floor that she would grab with her hands on the dirty floor to eat. So this is the Communist Party that Xi Jinping upholds every day, specifically the Maoist party. That party, the one that caused the death of his father and drove and sent him into the most, when he was like 16 or something, the most primitive village where he almost died of, he had worms and hunger and all that stuff. This Faustian character knows Faust by heart. So the China we're dealing with is not some simple-minded thing. It behaves externally like a cheap wind-up clock because he attacks everybody. 2 weeks ago, it was a week when they simultaneously attacked the Canadian government, Swedish government, the Australian government, the US government, Japanese government, and Indian government all in 1 week, okay? So this cheap wind-up toy behind it as a nation where the study of Latin is increasing, while US universities are dropping Latin, Chinese are studying Latin, where there be 4 translations of the Iliad. The Iliad is not politically correct, so probably American universities are dropping it. The Chinese are reading the Iliad, they're studying philosophy. The Chinese, one of the Ministry of Education of China has funded both the study of artificial intelligence to defeat the Americans and the translation of the Carmina of Catullus. As you know, Catullus is not a politically correct poet at all, but he is, many people believe, the finest Roman lyric. So the Chinese are translating it. So this country that behaves like a wind-up toy is not internally itself something that we should flatten.
Right. So how does this resolve? You have, why is it still behaving in such a sort of monomaniacal way when it is so complex on the inside?
All right. So add to it the latest thing, very new, which is Xi Jinping's deviation from Stalinist policy on the nationalities. They followed that blindly, which is national in form, communist in content. He deviated from that. He now wants the Mongols to stop learning Mongol. The Mongols of Inner Mongolia. He wants the Uyghur, as you know, to become Chinese-speaking atheists. And in Tibet, they can't do this so directly, but what they're doing is they've launched a skill training program to convert herders. This is the real Tibetan herders, the true, to convert them into factory workers and then send them to work outside China. Now, in addition to attacking 17 countries per day, in addition at home, deviating from the Chinese policy of recognizing national expression and national culture, suppressing it. And this cannot continue. You cannot have anything in the world escalating without limit. What's been going on in the last few years is internal escalation, external escalation. This cannot continue. Either Xi Jinping goes or the Chinese system is going to really, I think, will simply, they will be blocked in so many directions. I mean, right now, a perfectly innocent Chinese businessman. As you know, China is a communist country where there are numerous, millions and millions of private operators, private entrepreneurs, who do all kinds of stuff. So a Chinese entrepreneur arrives in Bolivia. He wants to buy a ranch for very good reasons. I have a ranch in Bolivia.
Yes.
Very good idea to raise cattle in Bolivia. It's great fun and quite profitable. He arrives and he's a guy from Xiamen, maybe, who has got some money, he may be in a car dealer, I don't know what. He wants to go there, he wants to be a rancher. That was my ambition. I did it. He's no different than me. Well, he's Chinese. And even though Bolivian government under Evo Morales was, pro-Russian, pro-Venezuelan, this and that, nevertheless, just because he was Chinese, they stopped him. He wanted to buy a ranch, they stopped him. There was another crazy Chinese who wanted to go to Iceland and buy a lot of land in Iceland to have a golf course. He got kicked out because he's Chinese. In other words, Chinese individuals who want to do honest business are prevented because of their government. Chinese researchers who want to study an innocent subject, not something military, are now rejected. Chinese students are wanted by American universities because of their limitless greed, but they're not really wanted in many other places. So many Chinese are paying a price every day for their behavior of their government, every day. Moreover, unlike the Soviet Union, where they paid a bigger price, in the Soviet Union, they were kept inside the Soviet Union. They were not allowed to travel, and therefore they had no information or whatever it is. None of this is true. The Chinese Great Wall against internet penetration is pierced by many holes. My last visit to China, quite recently, really, I was on the North Korean border. I wanted to use Gmail, and because it's kept, Google and so on, kept down. And at the hotel where I was staying, right on the Yalu River border, I said, I want to use Google or Gmail. They said, oh, okay. And cost me $10 to go through the great, $10 and you go right through the wall. So it's not sustainable. This thing cannot continue like this. You can't, first of all, Xi Jinping is running out of countries to quarrel with. you know. As I say, last week, Sweden, by some remote, happenstance, I happened to be in Beijing one night, long time ago. I mean, like 35 years, maybe more, when I was invited to the Swedish embassy where I had friends because they were having a little event because of the inauguration of the first Chinese foreign cultural program, state level, cultural exchange, 35 years ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, the Swedes closed them all down, shut them down completely because of abuse, just etc. So, and as I said, that is a day when I checked, and they were having the quarrels with all these different countries and all these different things. Cannot continue.
So it's fascinating, but does this end with a bang or a whimper?
Well, nothing that the Chinese are doing involves a government which will ignore nuclear deterrence. So whatever they're going to do has to be sub-nuclear. So let's say they can't invade Taiwan because, as you know, Taiwan is the only country in the world whose protection is a legal obligation on the US government, Taiwan Relations Act. There's no, Portuguese Relations Act. There is a Taiwan Relations Act. They know that the United States cannot stand by if they attack Taiwan, and however reluctantly, the Americans will get involved, and that could escalate. So there is that limit on Chinese conduct. There are other limits like this operating in different ways. The one limit that is not operating is the fear of making enemies out of countries that would rather be friends. They've been doing that and continue to do that. But they can't escalate. It can't go into a bang. They're not irrational.
All right.
I happen to know personally a guy called Luo Yuan. You can look him up. Luo Yuan, admiral. He's the great warmonger. He got all that stuff. He came to Washington once. He loved my wife's brisket. This Luo Yuan, who's a tall, good-looking guy, he talks cheerfully about nuclear war. And then he orders another drink. He has a little institute of his own. He's well regarded. He has several staff members, former military like himself, and he appears on television a lot and so on, but that's not decision making.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So he's like, Xi Jinping is like Wilhelm II without a Schlieffenplan, is that?
So yes, Wilhelm II analogy is perfect because he's a naval guy. He thinks, and he's a naval guy who doesn't understand maritime power.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Sea power is buying warships, and a rich country could buy 50 of them. Maritime power is having relationships with the insular and peninsular countries so that your ships are welcome in their ports. They can get resupply of fresh salad or whatever, shore leave, but also radar coverage, things, all that stuff. And Xi Jinping is a Wilhelm II who thought that you build warships and some of the, one. And two, he shares Wilhelm II's obsession with worthless, uninhabited islands that you have to protect at great cost, but give you no value. That's you might recall the Germans went as far as Guam.
Yes.
Guam, which is really through Asia up, closer to Japan. So, yes, Wilhelm II, but without a Schlieffenplan. That is to say, they cannot. He is very much like Wilhelm II. He's a Germanophile in Salzburg, but he cannot do that. You see, because as you know, the nuclear weapon is too powerful to be useful.
Yes.
And the Chinese have them, and it exceeds the culminating point of utility. It's like you get into a quarrel with your 4-year-old toddler, and you have nothing except
yes.
Don't use it. Don't use it. But we do have a problem amidst all this cheer, a very serious problem, Walter. And that is that the United States, to deal with China, should have intelligence on China, and we don't. There is no situational awareness. The Central Intelligence Agency believes in operating out of embassies because it means that you can have PTA meetings or whatever it is and so on. They don't do what other people do, which is China is full of expatriates. Not only the crowds of expatriates in the big cities, but you go to a small town like Dali in Yunnan province and you go around the corner, there's a German couple who run a factory, okay?
Yeah.
Just everywhere in China. The fact that the agency refuses to operate except from embassies. The fact that the agency refuses to train people to learn languages. I mean, languages like French, okay, let alone Chinese. Oh, no, it's too difficult. The Russians in their diplomatic academy insist on 2 languages. So Lavrovian, that's his real name. Lavrovian, he knows he was forced to study Sinhalese and Maldivian.
Ooh.
And he spoke about 30,000 people or something, maybe more, maybe 300,000 people, but that's it. And he has to learn Maldivian. The CIA people in Central Asia, which is to say, in Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, in Tajikistan, in all of these places, they don't have one person who speaks the local language. And then you say, how come you can operate there? And he said, we don't need the local language. They all speak Russian. So I say, yes, говорит по-русски, and I try to speak Russian. Well, as a matter of fact, I don't. In other words, Russian is just an alibi. So this kind, we need an intelligence organization. They have a building in Langley. If you empty it and fumigate it, and you start all over again with people who actually know something. Because the science boys are okay, you know, the satellites intercept, national security agency and so on. But we actually need situational awareness because we can't afford to mistake countries for paintings. They paint the country, you know.
Yeah.
They paint it, you know, Iraq is a country ready for democracy, whatever. They actually go there. You have to have situational awareness. In China, we need this desperately.
Yeah, it does strike me that the sort of bureaucratic culture in Washington does not lend itself to the kind of knowledge of the world that one needs. And then not just in the CIA, but in a whole number of Washington bureaucracies, think tanks, and so on. There's this sort of operating assumption the world really is America, you know, or we don't need to really understand other people or try to understand how they might be different from us.
Right. And in regard to that very exotic country called France, in today's Tablet magazine, which I look at, there's a translation of an article which I originally read in French, written by a very careful journalist who points out that the American press completely cannot report on terrorism in France. The American press, turns out the terrorists are not white. So the terrorists are non-white, hence they must have a reason to attack, okay? For example, Charlie Hebdo cartoons being offensive. Right. The French authorities are repressive. The French policeman shot this terrorist just like that. And what about due process and all that? Here's a French journalist, a feminist as it happens, writing a major article in France. Tablet magazine runs it in English. And what she documents carefully is how the Washington Post, New York Times are unable to report on France because France is too complex. It's too remote, too different, okay? That was not the case in the past. The whole American elite was very much at home in France.
Yeah.
It's become an exotic country. Why? Because you export your domestic obsessions. The terrorists happen to be non-white. Hence, if you are properly woke, they must have, this has to be payback and this and that and all that stuff. And you therefore can't report on the fact that these same people terrorize their own community. 99% of the time, they're terrorizing fellow people from North Africa or whatever. 1% of the time, they kill some French guy. Okay. And the French government is reacting to the 99. But all of this is too difficult. We have a problem as a society. If we're going to live in the world, we should have some knowledge of that world. And I know there's a lot of ignorance, but the one that roils me is the agency's ignorance because they're paid to know, okay? And instead, what we had, like the Scheuer guy who was the Bin Laden office, did not know Arabic, it wasn't demanded that he learns Arabic, and he didn't try to learn Arabic. When I asked him at the time, how would you do your work? Answer, I read translations. And here's Osama bin Laden. That was his target. The most verbal, the guy who was using his language to communicate, to signal. And there's this guy who's supposed to be in charge of the office who doesn't know. And his deputy didn't either. Deputy did not either. So you set up a bin Laden office, neither of them know Arabic. And very recently, I spoke to a group of 50 of them, 50 of these people. And I said, since you're all Middle East people, let me talk in Arabic for this president. Answer, oh, we don't know Arabic. 50 top analysts, 3 of them claimed to know Arabic. 2 of them were ethnic Arabs. We can't have this kind of stuff. Doesn't matter if it's Trump, Biden, or anybody else. We need to, when we deal with China, we must have finger feel. We must have understanding of the layers and the complexities of it. Not, otherwise, we will be fighting cardboard China, and we will not do very well.
All right. Well, thank you. This is we've had about an hour of conversation, which I very much appreciate. And once this, are you in Maryland now? Where are you?
I live in Chevy Chase.
Okay. Yeah.
And I can see tall buildings from where I live, but we have deer and we have raccoon. And early this year, we had the bear briefly. I was hoping to stay and eat all the cats and dogs of the neighborhood. Regrettably, he left.
A bear in Chevy Chase.
Yeah, a bear. Yeah, a bear came. Well, somebody else photographed it. I didn't, but they descend, you know, when the mothers kick them out of their things, they descend in Chevy Chase. They arrive.
Well, I know they've seen coyotes in Central Park, but I think no bears.
No, we have. I have not seen a coyote, but we see lots of wildlife. Chevy Chase is the place to be because we have, and I'm really hoping this next year we'll get a couple of bears living here in my garden. I was practically willing to shovel a home for them. Fortunately, they moved on.
All right. Well, I hope soon we can get together for lunch or dinner. It's great to see you always.
Same here, by all means. Listen, we're organized. If you email me, then I'll be happy to invite you over for lunch.
Well, that would be lovely.
We have a deck on a sunny day like today, and we have a porch if it rains. So get in touch. And I'd love to have you over.
Well, that would be great. Thank you, Edward.
Thank you.